Okay, 1, 2, 3. Are you there? Give me some noise or don't. Hi. So thanks for coming to our little presentation about composable commerce. Let me just do a little introduction. I'm here. My name is Gosia. I'm an e-commerce strategist at Ignite, which is a pan-European agency with 4 offices around Europe, 1 in Norway, 1 in Sweden, 1 in Denmark, and 1 in Poland. And we're here with Thomas, who is the CTO of Ignite Denmark, and Lars, who is the CEO of Uniform, our partner tool. Would you like to say something about yourself, guys?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are super happy to talk about Composable and hear any questions you have at the end. So my name is Lars. I'm co-founder at Uniform, and Uniform is a visual workspace that enables commerce at scale. So essentially, you can build commerce experiences and launch them faster.
I think that's good.
All right, so we've already told you who we are, and now just a little show of hands. We just wanted to see who is in the room. Raise your hand if you're an e-commerce manager or otherwise directly responsible for e-commerce site. All right, there's some of you, okay. So now raise your hand if you consider yourself a technologist. Fantastic. Who is familiar with the term headless or composable already? Great.
Amazing.
Who knows what MACH is? Fantastic. Okay, so we have a very good audience today. For some of you who have just said they are pretty familiar with what composable is, this might be a little bit obvious, but I'm still going to go through this slide anyway, just because I have prepared it. So I wanted to walk you very quickly through what's the difference between a traditional e-commerce architecture and what we would call a composable commerce. So traditionally, the user experience would start before the user would actually visit your website. So say they have seen an advert in Google Shopping or any other ad server, an advert for a product that would have been there put by a feed that has been enriched with some information, say, considering the availability or the purpose of buying a product for a gift. So if a potential customer is searching for a gift online, they might stumble upon your ads, and then they might land via this ad on the product page of your website. This product page would typically include some information such as product image, name, price, availability, you name it. And this would typically be all included into one platform, which is something that we would now call a monolith. So that would be one interface that you would work on, and that interface would be basically something that would still connect the backend to the frontend. When we're talking headless, or when we're talking composable, it's a different story. All this data that you see on the product page would be basically composed from different elements that could come from different vendors. And all of this could be shipped individually to your product page and arranged as you please if your frontend is built on a headless basis. And why would we even think about moving towards composable? Like, what's the idea behind it? So you are probably fully aware that the speed really matters. Milliseconds matter. And especially if we're talking about running a luxury brand, there was a recent study that's shown that up to 40%, there could be a difference of about 40% in conversion rates if the site loads up with a difference as little as 0.1 seconds. So speed matters, and this is why we're talking composable to you today. Lars, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just of curiosity, how many here in the room is on a headless architecture or consider a composable architecture? If you raise your hand, there's a few. How many is more on the monolithic architecture where you have one big system to, okay, that's most of you. Very good. So when we talk about the commerce, obviously performance is super important, and performance have moved many from a monolithic architecture to headless. And when we talk about headless, we also have different flavors of headless. So we have what we call headless V1 architecture. Thomas will share a little bit more about some of the capabilities of a headless V1 and what not to do with headless V1. But when we look at commerce, and the different objectives. Then we want to achieve better performance. Performance being speed to market. How fast can we launch different experiences? We want to increase conversion rates, and obviously we also want to have amazing performance, so getting our commerce sites in the green, so they are picked up by Google and we end top of the fold, page 1. That's amazing. We drive a lot of traffic to our website. We also want to be able to launch experiences. So here's how we actually manage the experiences and create the experiences. And it's also important here that we are omni-channel, so web, app, social, different channels, that we can reuse content and data across those different channels. And we put the experiences in the intent of the shopper. So what is their in the moment intent? The more we can connect into that and show the right experience for them, the more engaged they become, the more they will convert on our site. What is also very important is the employee happiness, that our developers can use the best tools for the jobs, that the editor experience is great, so it's easy to create, it's easy to connect the experiences across different channels, and that we can leverage the systems that we have already invested in. So we shouldn't go out and just do a very expensive re-platform to get the jobs done. So this is important for commerce objectives. What we essentially end up with is the dilemma. Because on one end, we have the monolith, the big coupled system to control our commerce experience. On the other end, we have a more open, headless architecture where we have all different systems connecting into the stack. So if we take the objectives that we want to achieve in building rich commerce experiences, and then we look at what is great in the monolithic world and what is great in the more headless world, then we end up here. So the headless world, if we want to achieve speed to market, we want to create compelling, fast shopping experiences, and developers get their best tools to get the job done, then we go headless. But if we also look at the merchants, the marketers, the practitioners, and essentially have the power tools to control the experience, then we are at the monolithic side, because we have visual composition management, we have more built-in tools to personalize and optimize the experience. So now we have two different worlds where the objectives doesn't really collide on either end here. So let's take a look at what's the experiences from building the V1 headless architecture.
Yeah, so thank you, Lars. As Gosha said, I'm the CTO at NoIgnite. I've also been fortunate enough to be on the other side of the table. So the experiences here are, I was the director of e-commerce at Bang & Olufsen and built their headless stack. And then after that, I had the fortune, which we'll talk about later, of trying again with Healing Annas, a Swedish multi-brand bed manufacturer. So these are the experience I'll be talking about today, and the experiences we bring into our sort of consulting practice as well. So my first learning when I built this type of setup at Bang & Olufsen is that there's a mental switch needed. So you're trying to look at really going into a world of continuous improvement. So the benefits you get from a headless composable architecture, if it's done right, is the ability to continuously improve without boundaries, essentially, because you can keep adding systems. There's a different view of that, which is sort of an OpEx over CapEx view. And I think this is important if you're sort of in charge of an infrastructure. With a monolithic setup, what happens is every 5 years, every 7 years, every 8 years, there's a replatform, an upgrade, and you're essentially investing a large pool of CapEx, capital investment in a new platform. And then your investment levels go down, you're paying for an SLA in the interim periods. With a composable mindset, you have to think of it more as an ongoing project. So it's much more of an OpEx load, where you're continuously investing in a team that continuously improves your infrastructure. So it's a much more flat investment line. The important thing here to me is not just the investment, but the fact that you're in the periods when you're replatforming, you're not innovating. And in, maybe 10 years ago, you could get away with repeated periods of not innovating for a year. But in the modern market, that just doesn't work. You have to be able to innovate all the time. So these replatforms become very expensive. Just to say, in the first generation that we built in Bang & Olufsen, we got so we were building a very sort of rich customer experience with content and commerce mixed together. We wanted it to be headless because we needed to get that speed out of the site for what is essentially a very media-rich, very visual experience. And we achieved that, but we achieved it with this type of architecture, which means all the data was coming from a lot of different systems, which meant a lot of point-to-point integrations between systems, a lot of complexity in an API layer that then didn't really achieve the second part of what we were dreaming of. So the ability to quickly innovate in different experiences. So getting it right is really important. So I think from that experience, sort of building that, we call it glue code, the code in between these systems becomes very complex and becomes hard to maintain, or your front end becomes very complex and hard to maintain. So sort of learnings from that is that there are potentially huge gains in your flexibility and time to market, but you really need to think about some of these things. The content model you're building can't be a one-to-one reflection of the experience, because then you're just replicating what a monolith does. So your experience, your page editor, you want to separate it into components that have different data sources. You want to keep the front-end code as simple as possible, because the time to market and flexibility, the speed of changing customer experience really comes down to how fast your developers or your agency's developers can build new front-end modules, new experiences. And if you start putting business logic in your single-page applications, which is frankly what we did early on in headless systems, that becomes a problem, that becomes a burden. And then, as Lars pointed out, employee experience matters. So one of the things you have to think about is, as you go from one system to maybe 3 systems or 4 systems, handling order data, handling product data, handling customer data, you want to really be aware that your employees are now being asked to log into 3 or 4 different systems to do what they could do in one before. That's a solvable problem, but it's a solvable problem only if you also take that seriously and focus on that as an actual improvement task.
So meet the glue code monster.
Yeah, so this is Gludo. This is where most end up when they go headless. So this is headless architecture V1. It started out that we wanted to get amazing performance. We start building. We perhaps use the latest front-end framework, could be Next, based on React and so forth. And then we have a lot of different API endpoints. We have a commerce endpoint, we have a CMS endpoint, we have a DAM endpoint. But the thing is, who is going to do the work between all these different API endpoints and your front end? That ends up being the engineering team. It ends up being the developer. They start hard coding every single field from your headless APIs into your front end. And over time, then everything becomes very, very hard to maintain and essentially is glued together. So what started out as being composable, we wanted to get all the benefits of moving faster, changing the components on the go, end up being composed. We are stuck in glue and we build a new monolith. And sometimes this monolith can be even worse than the monolith we are trying to move away from. So how do we solve this? Because composable is amazing. Composable is the case where you have different technologies that you want to leverage, and then essentially we are able to use different tools like Contentful for CMS, Cloudinary for digital asset management, might be SAP Commerce Cloud, that is our commerce engine that we have been using for years. We want to use AI to also help us with some of the copy creation. So this is composable. How do we do it is a matter of how do we actually manage the glass? How do we make it easy to add in the different components, utilizing the content and the data from the different systems? So this is also what is called digital experience composition. This is a rather new category, but it's a category that essentially helps enable composable at scale. So if you go back 20 years, then we all started building digital experiences in our web content management system. So this was early 2000s. This was very focused on one channel, the website, the desktop. Then we went to what was known as the digital experience platform. This was around 2010 to 2015. So essentially we went from one system to control one channel to a system to control all channels. And essentially this system was a suite of different tools: commerce, content management, digital asset management, marketing automation. Everything was tight coupled here. As Gosha mentioned in the beginning, this was the monolithic world. But then because of performance, we essentially began to move to headless. And we moved to headless because we wanted to get green in Lighthouse score. But as we went through these different cycles, we went from technical to very business user focused to very technical engineering-led focus here. So that means that if we choose headless, the marketers, merchants lose out. If we use the suite, then the developers hate it, and they are looking for more jobs that they can utilize their skills here. So digital experience composition is where both sides win. So essentially you get the right tools for the developers to use whatever framework they want to use to build the solution, but you also empower your business users. They can create, they don't have to be stuck in the developer backlog. They have the visual tools to create shopping experiences and launch them on the different channels. So when we use digital experience composition to manage composable commerce architecture, essentially the different layers of your architecture is connect whatever systems you want to use. Here it's also important to highlight that the starting point with composable is using the systems that you already have in place. You might have content in 3 different systems. You might have product information in an older system. Use it, and then you can swap out on the go. It's not like starting from scratch here. You connect the different technologies that you want to use to empower your stack, and then you connect with your design system, which is the front-end storefront that could be based on whatever development frameworks that your developers want to use. The magic here is really the layer in between, so you're able to connect to data, content coming from all these different systems, using the components from your design system, and let your users manage the experience, personalize the experience, and then deploy it out to an edge. So an edge is a global distributed content delivery network. And that means that when your users are coming to your site, you can deliver personalized experiences below 50 milliseconds anywhere in the world. So it's super fast, it's not flickering, it's really getting the speed and getting to the green in the Lighthouse store. And this is how the practitioner would essentially manage the multi-source experiences using a visual workspace. So components from your design system mapped to any content data coming from any underlying technology, and then launch to the edge super fast. So this is true composable architecture. And Thomas, you also have experience there.
I mean, after having built a headless setup for Bang & Olufsen, I had a second chance at Hildiganas and wanted to sort of address some of the additional challenges, and that's mostly about sort of the flexibility for developers and the editor experience. So what we did there, I think we can, what we did there is, let's call it ungluing the experience. We actually had a multi-brand setup, so 3 brands sharing a component library and using Uniform as a layer in between significantly simplified the integration needed to build the headless front end. And that, the API orchestration, being able to pull this data from different systems and present them in a unified view to editors. It also was really the enabler of reusing components across brands, because we could enable these component libraries with different styling, but the same data sources for multiple brands. So same commerce engine, same content management system. And really importantly, it gave full control of the customer experience so this was a switch from essentially Shogun on BigCommerce, so a built-in templating engine, which has challenges for sort of detailed management of customer experience, to the visual workspace that Uniform provides to give full control of the customer experience. And then, as Lars pointed out, the fourth side of this is because you have this separation and this breakdown into components and into data sources, the developer experience is a lot better, especially from a front-end perspective. And that's really what drives front-end customer experience innovation, is the ability for developers to deliver new experiences when you need them and deliver them fast.
So we wanted to sum it up with a little bit of checklist when it comes to migrating from a monolithic architecture to a composable architecture in your organization. And I do fully appreciate that we have a different set of various roles in the room with us today. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to give you a QR code after this presentation that you can go to, and you can download a full checklist with much more details into each of those little points. But what I wanted to point out is to always have that customer experience in your mind first. So my background is it's mostly in conversion rate optimization, acquisition and retention of the online customer. And what I found during my career so far is that this pretty much obvious point is always it's often being compromised for something like budget, for something like ease of use, for something like speed of delivery of the product itself. And if we do not have that idea that at the end of the day, this is the customer who is going to be using our site, our app on different devices in different locations, and all they want is really just a frictionless, easy experience with an easy checkout, with all the product information on the product page, with easy navigation, relevant search, and so on and so forth. No matter how much money we're going to be spending, it's always going to be a failed project at the end if we don't put the customer in the center. And I've been working for so long in e-commerce, and still this is one of the most overlooked points in many projects that I have stumbled upon. And another important thing would be the number 5, to make sure that you have somebody on your team that can do the composable oversight. So as much as agencies that we represent or anyone else who could be advising you in this journey of going composable can help, can bring you additional experience, can be your extra brain in a project like this, then nobody's going to have the relevant information about how your organization works, what is your specific business model, what's your USP, and how does it translate to everyday operations. So that would be something to definitely keep in mind, just having at least one person in-house who is going to be able to be that main decision maker for you. Don't leave it out to agencies. We still have 3 minutes left, so if there are any questions, this is the time for you. Oh, sorry, I still wanted that slide.
Hi. Understanding that API orchestration was the big shift from Headless 1 to Headless V2, what's the next unsolved problem? If Uniform solves the first problem, which is API orchestration, what's the next unsolved problem in Headless from V2 to V3?
Yeah, and just to highlight, there's 2 gaps, right? There's the API orchestration. How do we connect multi-sources so we can essentially connect that with the front end? And then there's the business user empowerment. So practitioner can create and doesn't have to go to the developers and file backlog items. I think the biggest one, and probably the next big one for many, is our perception of how we build experiences. Because we come from a world where the CMS was the starting point, and everything was really centered around the starting point. What is happening now, also with AI, is that the role of content is changing very, very fast. So content is many shapes now. You have like stable content that doesn't change very much. That should be managed, for instance, in a CMS, some sort of editorial workflow. Then you have a lot of volatile content. And the volatile content is what changes very frequently. And then you have content that is more content for personalization. And with the use of AI, we can finally begin to fulfill the promise of true contextual omnichannel experiences. So we need to distinguish what is content, where do we get content from which systems, and how do we bring them all together so we can orchestrate that and leverage AI as a 10x helper for merchants to get the jobs done and really scale that out.
And I mean, I can maybe add a little bit to that. I mean, also you can come to K14 and talk. I can talk for hours about the next challenges. I think part of it is what we need to figure out now from a sort of merchant perspective is the complexity of maintaining multiple pieces of software as a service. So I used to joke a little bit that when we did monolithic systems, we had to be best friends with IT if we were in the digital marketing space. And now we have to be best friends with procurement because we're basically bringing 12 contracts to the table that all scale on different parameters, and some of them are consumption based and some based on different metrics, and that gets quite complicated. So there's a business side of this that we're trying to figure out how to do right. So the idea that we start with, so as Lars said, you don't have to bring in 10 different systems. You can bring in 1 or 2 systems, build on what you already have. But eventually the promise is you can add best of breed tools. So if you want to do loyalty, you can add Talon 1, and if you want to do this, you can add this. And that gets sort of to a complex business setup. So it's not just a technical setup, which I think is solvable. I mean, I'm a geek, so I think technical problems are always solvable. The business side can be a little bit harder, and I think we're not quite ready. So back to the sort of CapEx, OpEx mindset, most companies aren't there. Like they understand, like you can understand it rationally, but being there and really moving to that mindset is a challenge, I think, for a lot of companies.
That's it.
Do we have time? We don't.
I think we're out of time, but
Right.
we're right down here at K14, so you can come and ask.
And the checklist, as I mentioned, is downloadable in much, much broader a form upon scanning this QR code, going to our website, and it's there for you to download.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for attending. Great question.